Today we're going to be using proportional relationships in tables, and this is a review of what we did yesterday. So our first goal, I can identify the constant of proportionality, which is also known as a k-value, given a proportional table. I can write an equation that represents a proportional table, and I can use the equation to find an unknown quantity. In other words, I can answer questions that are related to this table. So this table below shows a relationship between the number of miles a car travels and the number of hours. So the X column talks about hours, and the Y column talks about the amount of miles traveled. It says show the X over Y ratios and use these ratios to find the unit rate. Show the meaning of the unit rate by labeling. So this also, what I'm going to do, proves whether a table is proportional. So if I use all of the X to Y ratios, or excuse me, Y to X ratios, and they're all the same value, then that means I have a proportional table. So I'm taking all of the given Y values and dividing them by their corresponding or matching X values. And in this case, these are all 63. So this is indeed a proportional table. If you're ever asked to prove that, if your Y values divided by your X values are the same number, then it's proportional. So now it further says, show the meaning of the unit rate. Unit rate is also the constant of proportionality, and they want us to label it. So we're going to use these labels. So when we find 63, the unit rate of 63, what it means is 63 miles per hour or in 1 hour. So we can travel 63 miles in 1 hour. That's the meaning of what we just found. So what we did is our first goal. I can identify the constant proportionality, also known as the k-value, also known as the unit rate, given a proportional table. So we just did that. Our next goal is I can write an equation that represents a proportional table. It asks us to use the unit rate above to write an equation in this form, y equals kx. Then identify what each variable means. Well, the unit rate is called the k-value because we replace the k with our unit rate. So this should look like, the equation should look like this, y equals 63x. And the y represents, if you recall, the miles traveled, or I should put the number of miles traveled. The k represents the constant, and I'm going to abbreviate, of proportionality. And the x represents the hours, the number of hours. So when we are asked questions, this is going to become important that we know what variable that the numbers that we're given replace, or what we're trying to find. Are we trying to find, if they ask us a question, are we trying to find the y? If so, we'll leave the y as a variable. If we're trying to find the x, then we would leave x as a variable. However, if they told us something about miles, we would replace the y with that number. And if they told us a number, or the number of hours, we would replace the x with hours. And to show you where that information came from, it came from the table. So the y column shows us the amount of miles, the number of miles, that's where that came from. And the x column said the number of hours. So that's how we knew what this was about. So this equation, each one of these variables represents a specific thing. So we just accomplished this goal. I can write an equation that represents a proportional table. This equation represents this table. And now we're going to be able to use this equation to answer questions. So I can use the equation to find an unknown quantity. Letter C says use this equation to complete the table. Show the equation, the substitution, and the answer. Well, if we look, you probably noticed from the beginning that there were 5 x values, but only 4 y values. So this x value, we can now find its matching y value. So we do not know the y value, but we do know the x value of 10. So we're going to use our equation. So it mentioned to show the equation. So I'm going to show the equation. This is the equation that represents this table. Then it asks to show the substitution. So if you recall, we were not given the y value. That's what we want to know. So I cannot substitute anything in for the y because we don't know that number. We're trying to find that out. 63 is a constant, so it will stay in our equation. And x, they gave us the x value of 10. So I'm going to substitute 10 where the x is in this equation. And so now we have enough information to figure out what y equals. So y would equal 630. So now we know the y value. So let's go back up to the table and we can replace it in the table. If our x value is 10, we have now discovered that our y value must be 630. So we're going to replace that in the table. So that's one example of how we can use the equation to find an unknown quantity. Now let's see another example of that. Let's go to question D. Question D says, if Mason travels 7 hours in the car, how far could he travel? Again, they want us to show the equation, the substitution, and the answer like we did for C. Then they want us to state the meaning of the answer. So let's break this down. If Mason travels 7 hours, well, if you recall, hours in the table is talking about the x values. So let's circle that and let's say, okay, they're giving us an x value. It's not in the table, but we know that the first row is talking about the number of hours. They're asking us how far could he travel? So we're traveling in miles. So we don't know the y value. We don't know the number of miles, but we do know the hours. So they ask us to show the equation. It's the same equation that generated the table, and these two, hours and miles, are related to that. So this is our equation. And now I don't know y, which remember we identified as the number of miles. I have a constant of proportionality, so I'm going to use it. And then I do know the hours, and the x values in the table are talk about hours. So I'm going to substitute 7 where the hours are. So we just did the substitution. And then finally, we can find the answer. We're going to take 63 times 7. So use your calculator and find 63 times 7. And that is 441. Finally, we have to state the meaning of what 441 means. Well, y was talking about the number of miles. So Mason can travel . Here's our value, 441 miles. That was the question, and that's what we just answered. And he can do that in 7 hours. Thank you for watching. I hope this review was helpful, and we'll continue to work towards this.